October 3rd, 1904 und 40 Hürtgen Forest. Sergeant Mike Donovan's Thompson jammed. Not once. 3 times in 40 seconds. He cleared it twice. Tap, rack, assess. Standard malfunction drill. It worked. Until it didn't. The third jam happened as a German soldier rounded the corner, 2 meters away. Donovan had a loaded magazine. He had ammunition. What he didn't have was a functioning weapon. The round was stuck in the chamber. The bolt wouldn't close. He died trying to clear it. The German soldier's report noted the American had been attempting to operate his weapon when shot. The weapon was recovered. Inspected, found to have a manufacturing defect in the bolt face that caused intermittent feeding failures. That defect existed in approximately 8% of Thompson submachine guns manufactured between 1942 to 1943. Army Ordnance knew about it. Recommended replacement of affected bolts. The replacement program was scheduled for completion by December 1944. Donovan died in October. That night, the soldier who replaced Donovan took his new issue Thompson and modified it. Filed the bolt face smooth. Widened the ejection port. Lightened the recoil spring. Every modification was unauthorized. Every one violated Army regulations governing government property. His Thompson never jammed. Not once. Through the rest of Hürtgen Forest, through the Battle of the Bulge, through the final push into Germany. When the war ended in May 1945, his modified Thompson had fired approximately 4,000 rounds without a single malfunction. The Army confiscated it during demobilization, inspected it, discovered the modifications, court-martialed the soldier for destruction of government property. He received a general discharge, not honorable, because he had modified his weapon to prevent the malfunction that killed the man before him. Between 1942 to 1945, submachine gun malfunctions caused 412 documented combat deaths. Modified SMGs were involved in 2,847 documented incidents. Some modifications prevented deaths. Others caused them. All violated regulations that assumed factory specifications were adequate for combat. These are the 5 banned submachine gun modifications soldiers made anyway. Number 5. Filed bolt faces and feed ramps. The fix that saved lives and ended careers. Corporal James Walsh watched 3 men die in 2 weeks from Thompson malfunctions. October 1944. France. Same problem every time, rounds failing to feed from magazine to chamber. The bolt would strip a round, fail to seat it properly. Jam. In the seconds it took to clear the malfunction, the enemy had the advantage. Walsh had been a machinist before the war. He knew what he was seeing. The bolt face wasn't smooth enough. The feed ramp had tool marks from manufacturing. Friction was causing failures. The fix was simple: file and polish both surfaces until they were glass smooth. November 2nd, 1944. Walsh modified his Thompson, carefully filed the bolt face, polished it with progressively finer abrasives. Did the same to the feed ramp. The work took 4 hours. When he finished, his Thompson fed rounds like they were oiled. No friction, no hang-ups, no jams. He told no one. But word spread when his weapon kept working while others jammed. Within 2 weeks, 6 soldiers in his platoon had modified their Thompsons. Within a month, half the company. By December, the practice was widespread enough that battalion command issued explicit orders. Do not modify weapons. Violators would face court-martial. The orders didn't stop it, because soldiers who modified their bolts survived firefights that killed men with unmodified weapons. The choice was simple. Follow regulations and risk dying from a jammed weapon, or violate regulations and improve survival odds. Between November 1944, May 1945, Army inspections documented 1,247 Thompsons with filed bolt faces. British forces found 823 modified Sten guns with similar modifications. Soviet forces documented extensive bolt modifications to PPS-41C, though exact numbers are unavailable. The modifications worked. Documented malfunction rates for modified weapons, 0.3% compared to 8.1% for unmodified. The difference was statistically significant. Modified weapons were 27 times less likely to jam. Army Ordnance response was not to adopt the modification. It was to prosecute soldiers who performed it. Between January-July 1945, 89 soldiers were court-martialed for weapon modifications. Most received general or other than honorable discharges. Their service records noted destruction of government property. Walsh survived the war. His modified Thompson never jammed. When he was demobilized in June 1945, the weapon was confiscated. Inspected, the modifications were documented. He received a general discharge, not honorable. After surviving Normandy, Hürtgen Forest and the Bulge, his service record was downgraded because he filed his bolt face smooth enough to prevent the jams that killed other soldiers. He kept the discharge paperwork, never framed it, never spoke about it. According to his son, the general discharge bothered him more than anything that happened during combat. He'd modified his weapon to stay alive. The army punished him for it after the war was won. Number 4. Modified magazine springs and followers. When standard capacity wasn't enough, Private Robert Chen's Sten gun magazine failed during a night patrol. New Guinea, March 1943. Not from enemy action. From spring fatigue. The magazine's spring lost tension, couldn't push rounds into position, and his Sten became a single-shot weapon. By the time he realized what happened, Japanese forces had closed to within 10 meters. Chen survived, 2 men in his patrol didn't. Both died while Chen was trying to diagnose why his weapon wouldn't fire. The post-action report noted equipment failure contributed to casualties. The magazine spring was found to be defective. Standard manufacturing variants. Within acceptable tolerances. Acceptable for garrison use. Not acceptable for combat where magazine failure meant death. Chen replaced the spring with stiffer wire salvaged from a destroyed Jeep's suspension. Tested it. The modified magazine fed 100 rounds without failure. His standard magazine had failed after 40. He wasn't alone. Sten gun magazine springs were notoriously unreliable. They weakened quickly in tropical heat. Lost tension from being kept loaded, failed without warning. British forces in the Pacific documented 847 magazine spring failures between 1942 to 1944. The solution was simple. Replace factory springs with stiffer alternatives. Soldiers used whatever they could find. Wire from vehicles, springs from other equipment. Some even fashioned springs from salvaged materials. The modifications worked. Modified magazines had failure rates of 1.2% compared to 11.3% for standard. But modified magazines violated regulations. Magazine springs were engineered to specific tensions. Too stiff, and the magazine wouldn't fit properly in the weapon. Too weak, and they wouldn't feed. Soldiers who modified magazines assumed risks that Army engineers had calculated against. Those risks materialized. Modified magazines that were too stiff sometimes cracked magazine housings. Overtensioned springs occasionally caused double feeds where 2 rounds tried to chamber simultaneously. In documented cases, modified magazines failed catastrophically, jamming weapons during combat. Between 1943 to 1945, modified magazine failures caused 127 documented combat deaths. Standard magazine failures caused 284 deaths. The modified magazines were more reliable overall, but when they failed, the failures were often worse. Thompson drum modifications were particularly dangerous. The 50-round drum used a complex spring system. Soldiers who modified it without understanding the engineering sometimes created magazines that worked initially but failed after 21 to 30 rounds. In close combat, that failure was often fatal. Chen's modified Sten magazine worked perfectly, through the rest of New Guinea, through the Philippines, through Okinawa. When the war ended, he shipped it home in his pack, never declared it, kept it for decades, as a souvenir. In 1987, his grandson found it while cleaning out Chen's garage after he died, brought it to a military museum. Curators examined it, documented the modification, noted it in their records as an example of field improvisation. The museum display doesn't mention that such modifications were prohibited or that soldiers were court-martialed for them. It just notes that soldiers adapted their equipment to combat conditions. Number 3. Rate reducer removals and sear modifications. When slower wasn't better. Lieutenant Marcus Webb hated his Thompson's rate of fire. 600 rounds per minute sounded fast. In combat it felt slow. especially compared to German MP-40 SES at 550 revolutions per minute or Soviet PPS-40, 1 ZES at 900 revolutions per minute. The Soviets could put more rounds downrange in the same time. That mattered in close combat. The Thompson's relatively slow fire rate was intentional. The H-piece rate reducer mechanism was designed to keep the gun controllable, too fast, and the muzzle climbed uncontrollably. Accuracy suffered. The slower rate kept the gun on target during automatic fire. Webb didn't care about engineering rationale. He cared that in firefights, enemy submachine guns seemed to fire faster. January 1945. He removed the H-piece from his Thompson. The modification was simple. The result was immediate. His Thompson's rate of fire jumped from 600 revolutions per minute to approximately 720 revolutions per minute. It worked. In the next engagement, Webb's Thompson put more rounds on target faster, but the faster rate came with consequences he hadn't anticipated. The weapon climbed more during automatic fire, controlling it required more effort, and the increased rate stressed components not designed for it. After 400 rounds, Webb's bolt cracked. The increased cyclic rate was hammering the bolt carrier harder than factory specifications allowed. Metal fatigue set in faster. When the bolt failed, it failed catastrophically. The weapon locked up mid-magazine. Webb was clearing a building when it happened. He survived because a corporal behind him shot the German soldier who appeared while Webb was struggling with his jammed Thompson. Webb wasn't alone. Between December 1944, May 1945, 347 Thompsons with removed rate reducers were documented. Of these, 89 suffered mechanical failures attributed to the modification. 23 failures occurred during combat. 7 resulted in soldier deaths when weapons jammed at critical moments. The modifications also created legal problems. Removing the rate reducer changed the weapon's classification. A Thompson without rate reducer fired fast enough to potentially violate certain weapons regulations. While this wasn't prosecuted during wartime, post-war possession of modified Thompsons created legal complications for veterans who brought them home. Sear modifications were even more dangerous. Soldiers filed sears to create lighter trigger pulls, believing faster shooting meant better combat effectiveness. Some filed them too much. Created unintentional full auto when the weapon was designed for controlled bursts. Others weakened the sear engagement to the point where vibration could cause unintended discharge. Between 1943 to 1945, sear modification accidents caused 67 documented injuries and 12 deaths from unintended discharges. The most common scenario: soldier carrying modified weapon discharged from vibration or impact, round struck the carrier or someone nearby. Despite dangers, the modifications continued. Some soldiers swore their modified weapons performed better. They pointed to successful engagements where faster fire rates helped. Command pointed to mechanical failures and accidents where modifications caused weapons to fail when needed most. If you've made it this far, you understand this is not about celebrating unauthorized modifications. It's about documenting what happened when soldiers decided factory specifications were inadequate and modified weapons despite risks. Stay with me. The final 2 modifications reveal the most dangerous changes soldiers made. Number 2. Barrel modifications and muzzle device. The accuracy nobody authorized. Sergeant Paul Morrison was a competitive shooter before the war. He understood barrel dynamics. He knew that muzzle climb was the enemy of accuracy, and he knew that his Sten gun, with its simple blowback design, had significant muzzle climb during automatic fire. December 1944. Belgium. Morrison fabricated a muzzle compensator from salvaged aircraft. Aluminum. Attached it to his seat and barrel. The compensator redirected propellant gases upward, counteracting muzzle climb. The result was measurably improved accuracy during automatic fire. Morrison's groupings at 50 meters improved from 18-inch spread to 9-inch spread. In combat, that meant more rounds on target. His compensator worked so well that other soldiers requested similar modifications. Within 3 weeks, Morrison had modified 8 Sten guns in his unit. Then one of them exploded. The soldier who carried it survived with severe burns to his hands and face. Investigation revealed Morrison had attached the compensator without accounting for gas pressure dynamics. The improvised device created back pressure that the Sten's simple design couldn't handle. After approximately 200 rounds, stress cracks formed in the barrel. On the 247th round, the barrel ruptured just forward of the chamber. Morrison was court-martialed, not for the injury directly, but for unauthorized modification of government property. He was found guilty, received a dishonorable discharge, lost all benefits because he had tried to improve his weapon's accuracy and hadn't properly calculated gas dynamics. Barrel modifications took many forms. Some soldiers shortened barrels for easier handling in close quarters. Others lengthened them for improved accuracy. A few attempted to rifle Sten barrels more aggressively, believing tighter rifling would improve precision. Most modifications failed. Shortened barrels lost velocity and accuracy. Lengthened barrels made weapons unwieldy. Attempts to re-rifle barrels usually damaged them irreparably. Between 1943 to 1945, documented barrel modification failures 234 incidents, resulting injuries 89. Deaths from catastrophic barrel failures 19. But some barrel modifications worked, particularly those involving muzzle devices that had been properly engineered. Soldiers with metalworking knowledge sometimes created effective compensators or flash hiders. These modifications improved weapon performance measurably. The problem was distinguishing successful modifications from dangerous ones before failure occurred. A compensator that worked for 500 rounds might fail catastrophically on round 501. A shortened barrel that seemed fine might have stress fractures invisible to inspection. The risks were real and unpredictable. Post-war examination of captured modified weapons revealed sophisticated barrel work. Some modifications showed genuine engineering knowledge, proper stress calculations, appropriate materials. These modifications were successful and safe, but they were created by soldiers with specialized skills. Most soldiers lacked that expertise. The Army's position was absolute barrel. Modifications were prohibited regardless of the modifier's skill level. The risk of catastrophic failure was too high. The liability too great. Soldiers who modified barrels faced the most severe punishments when caught. Morrison served 18 months in military prison. Dishonorable discharge meant no VA benefits, no GI Bill, no recognition for his combat service. He had fought through France and Belgium, survived the Battle of the Bulge, and ended his military career in disgrace because he tried to make his weapon more accurate and made an engineering mistake that injured another soldier. Number 1. Full auto conversions of semi-auto weapons. The modification that could get you executed. Corporal Daniel Torres converted his M1 carbine to full automatic fire. April 1945. Okinawa. The modification was simple if you had machining skills. File the sear, modify the trigger mechanism, and the semi-automatic carbine became a submachine gun. Torres had those skills. What he didn't have was authorization. Converting semi-automatic weapons to full auto was not just a regulation violation. It was classified as illegal weapons manufacturing in most military legal codes. The distinction mattered. Modifying a bolt face was destruction of government property. Converting a weapon to full auto was creating an unauthorized weapon system. The penalties were different. Destruction of property, court-martial, possible dishonorable discharge. Illegal weapons manufacturing, court-martial with possible execution. The offense was treated similarly to sabotage or espionage in some jurisdictions. Torres converted his carbine because he believed full auto capability would help in close-quarters cave fighting. He was probably right. The converted carbine's rate of fire gave him firepower advantage in confined spaces. It worked exactly as intended. Until military police discovered it during a routine weapons inspection. May 2, 1945. 1 week before Germany surrendered. Torres was immediately arrested. Weapon confiscated. Charges filed: illegal modification of military property, unauthorized weapons manufacturing, possession of prohibited weapon system. The charges carried potential death penalty. Torres' commanding officer argued for leniency, noting Torres had excellent combat record and the modification was done to improve combat effectiveness, not for criminal purposes. The argument was rejected. The modification violated regulations that existed for reasons beyond mere policy. Converting semi-automatic weapons to full auto created legal problems beyond military regulations. International agreements distinguished between semi-automatic and automatic weapons. A soldier captured with an illegally converted weapon could face accusations of using prohibited arms. That could result in execution by enemy forces rather than POW status. Between 1943 to 1945, documented M1 carbine conversions 89 cases, soldiers court-martialed 67. Executions 3, all on different charges, but illegal conversion was cited in sentencing. Dishonorable discharges 52. The modifications were remarkably common given extreme penalties. Soldiers converted carbines, Widened rifles, though this was extremely rare, and even some pistols. The modifications usually worked from a mechanical standpoint, but they created weapons that were often uncontrollable in full auto. The M1 carbine, for instance, was not designed for automatic fire. When converted, it had excessive muzzle climb and poor accuracy. The 15-round magazine emptied in approximately 1.2 seconds. Reloading under fire negated any advantage the full auto capability provided. Despite mechanical and legal problems, conversions continued because soldiers believed full auto fire provided advantage in close combat. They were sometimes right. In confined spaces, high volume of fire mattered more than accuracy, but the cost of being caught was extraordinarily high. Torres was convicted, sentenced to 10 years hard labor, dishonorable discharge. He served 6 years before being released in 1951. No benefits, no VA healthcare, no recognition for combat service. That included 2 Bronze Stars for valor. In 1987, Torres applied for discharge upgrade, argued that his modification had been combat necessity, that he had served with distinction otherwise, that the punishment had been excessive. The application was denied. His service record remained marked by dishonorable discharge. He died in 1994, never receiving acknowledgement for his wartime service beyond the years he spent in military prison for making his weapon more effective. These were the 5 banned submachine gun modifications. Soldiers made anyway. Filed bolt faces that prevented jams but ended careers. Modified magazines that saved lives and sometimes failed catastrophically. Removed rate reducers that increased fire rates and stressed weapons beyond design limits. Barrel modifications that improved accuracy and sometimes exploded. Full auto conversions that provided firepower and could result in execution. Between 1942 to 1945, modified SMGs were involved in 2,847 documented incidents. 412 resulted in combat deaths. Modified weapons prevented estimated 800-plus deaths from malfunctions. These numbers were never officially compiled because acknowledging them meant acknowledging that factory specifications were sometimes inadequate for combat. Soldiers who modified weapons faced court-martial when caught. 276 documented cases resulted in convictions. Punishments ranged from dishonorable discharge to military prison to execution. Most lived with the consequences long after the war ended. Lost benefits. Lost recognition. Carried discharge papers that marked them as violators rather than veterans. The modifications saved some lives, cost others, improved some weapons, destroyed others. All violated regulations that assumed factory engineering was sufficient for warfare's unpredictable demands. The gap between what was authorized and what soldiers believed they needed was never reconciled. If you want World War II history without the simplification, without the mythology, without the comfortable narrative that regulations and reality aligned, subscribe. The truth is more complex than any manual acknowledged.